Ready to start. Let's see. We have we're going to talk about tobacco tax policies, formulation, effectiveness, and challenges. This is a project that PID has in collaboration with the University of Illinois at Chicago, with Dr. Roberto Iglesias, who is with us. This is a project that we've been working on for a while. Our team has been working on for a while. And obviously, as you all know, it's a very important project because tobacco is a health hazard, and many countries have now started to wake up to it. Used to be a time when I was studying at Chicago. Robert Lucas, the famous Nobel Prize winner, used to walk into class and first thing, he'd put an ashtray in front of him, and then he'd chain smoke through the class. But I believe he's given it up too now. And all the students were smoking too. But worlds have changed. We've all learned for the better, and we are now not smoking. So thank you. I think it's an important question, how the tax policies should be approached towards tobacco so that people can be discouraged from smoking, along with so many other things that we are doing, humanity is doing to quit smoking. And lots of my friends who used to smoke have quit smoking. So it's a great policy to have. So thank you very much. I'll thank everybody for participating, and I'll thank PID colleagues for, I think they've been working for over a year on this project. So I think we should have some very interesting things to talk about. We've got a great panel for you. We've got member IR policy, FPR, Chaudhry Mohammad Tariq. So it's great to have an FPR participation. We always look for government participation. We always welcome government participation because they are our equal partners, in fact, better partners because they have to enact policy. Then we've got Dr. Frank Chalupka. Oh, he is from the University of Illinois. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. He's from the University of Illinois. He's helping us do this project. He's leading the project. Thank you, Dr. Frank. We really appreciate your collaboration. Then we got Dr. Roberto Iglesias, technical advisor at WHO. WHO, obviously, these days in the news, thanks to COVID. They're an important international organization that is helping global health standards. We've got our own Dr. Mahmoud Khalid, a senior research economist at PIDE, who's been working on this project for a while. We've also got Mohammed Saber, principal economist, SPDC, which is a think tank in Karachi. So we've got a great lineup. Let me not hold back. Let me call Dr. Frank Chalupka to begin the webinar. Dr. Saab, over to you. Dr. Frank, over to you.
Dr. Frank, kindly unmute yourself, sir.
There seems some trouble with the system. I can't hear.
Dr. Frank, we are unable to hear you, sir.
Are you able to hear?
I can see the presentation.
Yes, sir. Now it's okay, sir. Now it's okay. Go ahead, sir.
No, he is audible. Okay. Sir, go ahead.
Okay, I apologize for that. So I'm quickly going to share some of the global evidence that we have on the impact of tobacco taxation, both in terms of its impact on tobacco use, but also some of the broader economic impacts. One of the things that we've learned from hundreds of studies now at this point from around the world is that increases in tobacco taxes, increases in tobacco prices, are very effective in reducing tobacco use. We estimate that if you look at the global experiences, a 10% increase in price will, on average, reduce overall consumption by about 4% in high-income countries and by a bit more, about 5% in low and middle-income countries. Much of the reduction that we see comes from reductions in the prevalence of the use of tobacco products. This is an illustration from Brazil, where we're working with some colleagues at the Catholic University of Brazil. And what we've seen there is that as they've pushed up tobacco taxes over the years, as prices have gone up, we've seen significant reductions in the number of adults who smoke in Brazil, in large part because people are quitting smoking in response to those price increases. One of the other things that we've learned is that price has a particularly big impact in deterring young people from taking up tobacco use. This is from a recent study that we did for Chile, where we see that the increases in taxes, the increases in prices that have happened there over the last 15 or 20 years have really been effective in reducing the prevalence of tobacco use among young people. And here we estimate that youth initiation is somewhere between 2 and 3 times more responsive to price than what we see for adults. The other key thing that we've learned is that it's not just increases in prices that are important, it's also changes in the affordability of cigarettes or tobacco products. And this is really a measure of how price is changing relative to incomes. So what we see in countries where incomes are rising relatively rapidly, if prices aren't rising faster, the affordability of tobacco products is increasing, and that leads to increases in tobacco use. So the measure of affordability that we use is how much prices are changing relative to income. And what you can see here from this picture in Indonesia is that affordability was increasing over time. It took less and less and less of income to be able to purchase cigarettes, and that really contributed to a significant rise in smoking in Indonesia. And then the big reason that we're here to talk about this is because of the impacts that this all ultimately has on health. And what we know is that when those prices go up, when consumption comes down, we really do start to see improvements in health. And that's illustrated by this picture from France, where we saw taxes increasing in the 1990s, early 2000s, prices going up, consumption coming down, and within a short time, we start to see some of the health benefits appearing in terms of reductions in lung cancer death rates. The other part of the story, though, is that these tax increases are not only effective in reducing tobacco use and improving health, they're also very effective in generating revenues, given the inelasticity of demand. And that's illustrated by this picture from Ukraine. We see this in country after country around the world. When taxes go up, tobacco use goes down, but cigarette tax revenues go up. So a few years ago, we reviewed the evidence on this globally, and the key conclusion that we drew from this is that increasing taxes, increasing prices is the most effective way of reducing overall tobacco use. The other thing that we've been learning, though, is that it really matters how the tax is being implemented. It's not just enough to raise the tax. We also need to have good tax systems. We need to deal with those issues around affordability and so on. And this is something that we've been looking at the University of Illinois in Chicago in our tobacconomics program, trying to really understand the strength of tobacco tax systems, cigarette tax systems in particular, around the world. And what we're doing here is focusing on several key dimensions of these systems. We're looking at the tax structure, what type of tax is applied, how it's applied. We're looking at how much tax accounts for in terms of its share of price, but also in terms of the overall price for tobacco products. And then looking at how affordability of tobacco products is changing over time. If we look at this region, what we see is that there are dramatic differences across countries in terms of what's happening with the affordability of tobacco products. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we see that affordability has changed very little over the last 10 years, and that's going to then have very little impact in terms of using the tax to reduce overall tobacco use. We've also been looking at issues around the share of taxes and prices and overall prices. And again, we see here that Pakistan has a lot of room for improvements in terms of raising the share of the excise tax and price and raising the overall share, and as a result, in reducing tobacco use. So again, we're in the process of putting together what we're calling a cigarette tax scorecard, evaluating tax systems around the world. This is an illustration of some preliminary data from this scorecard that looks at the strength of these systems. Effectively, what we're doing is ranking tax systems on a 5-point scale, with 5 as the highest possible score, 0 as the lowest score. And you can see again here, Pakistan is coming in just under 1 on this scale. So a lot of room for improvement. Simplifications to the tax structure, increases in the tax, increases in prices, and reductions in affordability would help to improve things. The last couple of points I want to make are just around some of the economic arguments that get used against tobacco taxation. One of the arguments that's often heard is that tobacco tax increases will have negative macroeconomic effects. They're going to lead to job losses. And this is really a false argument. What we see here is that, yes, when taxes go up, we do see reductions in consumption. We do see some job losses in the tobacco sector. But what happens is that we see more than offsetting gains in other sectors as people who consume tobacco products now spend those resources on other goods and services, and as the government spends those increasing tax revenues. And we have our colleagues at SPDC on the line who've done some really nice work for Pakistan, showing the net impacts of tax increases, reductions in tobacco use in terms of their positive impacts on employment in Pakistan. Another thing that we hear is that the tax increases are going to have particularly negative distributional effects. They're going to hurt the poor. And what we see, again, from studies from around the world, as well as some of the emerging evidence in Pakistan, is that this is not the case. What we see is when you really look at the long-term impacts, what we see is that low-income populations reduce their tobacco use the most in response to tax increases. They see improvements in health, they see reductions in medical care spending, and they see improvements in productivity that lead to income gains. So this is a picture from a World Bank study for Chile. They've done the same sort of work around the world. And consistently what we see is a positive impact, a progressive impact of tobacco tax increases when we factor in these long-term effects. And then the last argument that we hear, and one that's particularly resonating in Pakistan, is the idea that increases in taxes will automatically lead to illicit trade in tobacco products. And again, when we look at the global evidence, what we see is that there's really the opposite relationship. We see countries that have high taxes, high prices are countries that have relatively small market shares for illicit products, and vice versa. Countries with lower taxes and prices actually see bigger problems with illicit trade. And those problems with illicit trade are really generated as a result of issues related to governance. The presence of corruption in countries, as illustrated on this picture, the lack of effective enforcement mechanisms, lack of good tax administration, and so on. And it's these sort of factors that really drive illicit trade. And again, what we've learned from the global experiences is that governments can do something about illicit trade if they really make it a priority. If they adopt strong tax administration, effective tracking and tracing technologies, prominent tax markings, control the distribution chain for tobacco products, and really strongly enforce their tobacco tax laws and imply strong penalties on those that are engaged in illicit trade. And when you do this, we've seen in countries around the world that governments can get illicit trade under control and at the same time raise taxes, raise prices, reduce tobacco use, and raise tax revenues. So the bottom line on all this is that we have a lot of global evidence that shows that tobacco tax increases are very effective, make good economic sense. They're going to have positive public health impacts. They're going to generate revenues. They're not going to harm economies. And this is going to be good for the health and economic development of countries overall. So again, a very quick run through of the global evidence, which you can find a lot more information on our website. And we'll be continuing to talk about this during the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chalupka. I think it's fascinating. Tobacco tax policy can really help in terms of controlling tobacco use. And certainly we need to learn from that. But Dr. Chalupka, we've got one of our largest enterprises in Pakistan is a tobacco company. It's probably the second largest company, tobacco company, which is
excuse me, sir, Nadimul Haq sir, you're not audible. Can you please move a bit closer to the mic?
Okay. Dr. Chalupka, thank you very much. That's the
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. That's a wonderful presentation, and you gave us a way forward in terms of tobacco taxation. We'll get the views from our tax people as to what they think about it. But let me also put this forward, very simple question. One of the biggest companies that we have in Pakistan is a tobacco company. I mean, it's probably the first or the second largest company in Pakistan in terms of market capitalization. And it has a huge amount of influence, and they will certainly resist that. So do you have anything on political economy of tobacco taxation too, Dr. Luca?
So I think that is a critical issue. The size of tobacco companies, the resources that they have, give them a lot of power when it comes to lobbying against tobacco tax increases. And again, I think part of it reflects some of the arguments that I talked about around their economic contributions, around the potential impact of tax increases on things like illicit trade. And that's where some of the work that we're supporting in Pakistan, work by our colleagues at PIDE, work by our colleagues at SPDC, is really starting to deal with these sorts of issues, these sorts of arguments. The team at PIDE, for example, is looking at what the real economic impact of tobacco use is in Pakistan, trying to understand the economic costs of tobacco use, which are going to be substantial. The team at SPDC has looked at the macroeconomic contributions, looked at the employment contributions, which turn out to be relatively small, and which demonstrate then that when you raise taxes and reduce tobacco use, we actually see economic gains, not economic losses in response. And they're also working on a variety of issues related to illicit trade in tobacco products. And again, demonstrating that tax increases are not going to drive illicit trade, but that there are other factors that are really causing the illicit trade in tobacco use and that could be brought under control. So I think we'll hear later in the webinar about some of this research and help to address some of these arguments around the political economy of tobacco taxation.
Great, thank you. So then with that, let me just go to the two studies that are being done. Dr. Mahmood Khalid, will you present what the PID has been doing? And then we'll go to SPDC, and then we'll go to the rest of the panel.
Nadeem, can we ask our guest from the FBR first?
Okay, you want to go that route? Okay, fair enough. G, Tariq.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. With your permission, Mr. Nadeem, can I just ask a question from Frank? I admire the way Frank has given his discourse. It's a wonderful presentation indeed, and very effectively established the nexus between increase in taxes and decrease in consumption of tobacco. Thank you very much, Frank. Here, the countries like Pakistan, where there are governance issues and its enforcement of tax laws is a bit weaker, whenever we increase taxes, what happens that those who are operating in the informal sector, there is increase in non-duty paid or untaxed cigarettes in the market. Do you have any empirical study or any guidelines for my organization and for myself, that what would happen if I'm going to increase taxes on tobacco? Would it lead to increase of non-duty paid cigarettes in the market? Your take on this, Frank?
So my take on this is
the typical scenario of Pakistan. Yes.
Right. So this is a big issue in Pakistan. Illicit trade has been a significant problem in the past. And I think it isn't because of this automatic connection between increases in taxes and increases in illicit trade. I think a lot of it has to do with how the tax laws are being implemented and enforced. And this is where our colleagues at SPDC have done some really nice work. So there's the concern that you have a lot of cigarettes coming in that aren't being taxed. A big part of that is actually due to underreporting of production by tobacco companies. So they'll be able to present some evidence, I think, later in the webinar that specifically talks about how big of a problem that is and some of the ways to get around that. So they've been working specifically on this work in Pakistan. And again, I think it becomes more of an issue of how strongly the tax laws are being implemented, whether or not you have effective controls over the distribution system, over production. And I think that's where the efforts to implement a tracking and tracing system are going to be particularly important. But my understanding is that is something that's in the works and has not yet been implemented. So I think as you start to do that, as you start to enforce things better, you'll be able to get a real control over the illicit market, and you'll be able to raise your taxes and simplify your tax system.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. May I now begin with in fact, you made Dure Nayab has made my job a bit easier. He has referred 3 or 4 questions which I need to dilate upon. I would be moving on these questions which have been referred to me. The first question is how are tobacco policies formulated in Pakistan, the mechanism and how a tax rate decided. This is a very generic question. Obviously, as far as the ideals are concerned, tax policies should be formulated on the basis of certain evidence, and rates need to be moved up or down. Looking into the behavior of tobacco consumption, coming to this typical commodity. But let me share this that we do a bit of data analysis for formulating our tax policies as far as tobacco is concerned. We may not be doing this at an optimal level or at ideal level the way developed countries are doing. We need to improve this, I understand. And generally policies, a lot of input is given by the FBR, and then we place the policies before the government of Pakistan goes to the parliament. Ultimately, is the way it happens in other countries. Yeah, I think there is a lot of room for improvement in this, especially in tobacco taxation, and we'll be carrying out a bit more incisive analysis on the data, and we look into how can we optimize our tax policies for this suppressing this consumption. We may not be moving, we may not be making our tax policies just for revenue generation from the sector. Coming on to the next question, that was what is the basic objective of tobacco tax policies, especially FED on tobacco. Let me be a bit frank in admitting that obviously we are having a revenue of around more than 100 billion rupees from this sector. And I, being from this revenue collecting agency, I cannot be, absolutely insensitive or to the revenue demands. But there is a very strong feeling in the FBR that we are having this FED for discouraging consumption of tobacco, and it's not just the source of revenue collection. And we have to be mindful of this, that this should not be just a source of revenues. We aim at discouraging consumption. Coming to the next question, should tobacco taxation be executed through FET and GST, or should there be health tax as well? My take on this subject is that FED, especially by definition, this excise taxes all over the globe, these are meant for discouraging consumption of certain commodities. Otherwise, GST would be enough for revenue generation. Coming to this, having this tax that could be called as earmarked for health purposes, this is a nice idea. This is a good idea, having this health tax. But we are here in Pakistan, we have a typical legal constitutional problems. When we style a certain tax and we earmark that this type of taxation will be spent on a particular activity, this comes out of goes beyond the definition of the tax in my constitutional disposition. What happens is here we define taxes as compulsory exactions coming from enterprises or people that goes to the common pool, common funds that is available for common purpose to the government. If I say I'm going to have this tax for meeting expenditure on a specific activity like health, my courts do not call it a tax. They say this is a fee. And what is the tax implication? Implication is that for the fee, I cannot make laws through a money bill. And money bill in Pakistan, these go to only the National Assembly. National Assembly is the competent forum to pass taxation by way of money bill. But if there is some item that doesn't fall in the ambit of the money bill, that goes to the Senate as well. That is a cumbersome process. Anyhow, but I will be looking into this, having a separate health tax and discussing it further with the law division and the people around. If we can explore this and we can earmark this tobacco taxation for the health benefits of the people, in principle, I understand it's a nice idea and that will be a good thing to do. But I need to look into the constitutional implications and legal implications of moving this type of proposal. Coming to the fourth thing, what are, if any, the main hurdles in the FBR and tobacco taxation? I think enforcement issues as we are having enforcement issues. We have already pointed out, we have referred to the track and trace mechanism. We are already into this, and we hope to put in place track and trace system by this December. And one thing that should be, I'm pleased to inform to this audience, all of you would be pleased to know this. Very recently, we've issued the rules. We call it as video analytics of production of any manufacturing unit. The rules have been promulgated and issued. What is the idea? We are going to have this electronic gadgets and video cameras installed on the manufacturing processes of various industrial sectors. And we will be having this technology that can count the production and that is linked to our system. FBR is going to have a centralized control room, and the production sites of various factories would be linked through internet with our centralized control room. And ultimately that would facilitate the Federal Board of Revenue for real-time monitoring of production activities. And so far, we have entered into a memorandum of understanding with sugar sector. Sugar industries are the first to go for this. And we hope that we can go for this real-time monitoring of production of cigarettes on the part of various cigarette industries. And if we are capable of installing this, most of it, the enforcement issue will be optimally addressed, I believe. This is a very good step. And for this purposes, the first step was promulgation of rules that is there. And as a matter of second step, we need to identify and enlist certain vendors of this technology. And once we shortlist the vendors and list them with the FBR, these factories would be asked to buy this equipment at their own expenditure, installed from the listed vendors only. And listed vendors would be responsible that there is no tampering with the system, and the system is accurate and works good. And we are into this process. In a week or so, we are having demonstrations from these vendors of the IT products and technology products. And once that is there, we may be going for this. This is the update from my side. If any participant has any comment or questions, most welcome.
Thank you, Tariq Sahab. Very thoughtful comments. I think FBR has got the essence of the argument, and I think it's worth exploring this further. So I think your points are spot on, very, very correct. And inshallah,
thank you, sir.
Go to the next, the other participants. Let's go to Khalid Sahab. Khalid Sahab, do you want to tell us what the PID has done? Khalid Sahab, are you there? I don't think he can hear me. Can he?
सर महमूद खालिद साहब मेरा ख्याल है अभी डिस्कनेक्ट हुए हैं.
I think we lost Khalid. You can ask Roberto while Khalid logs back.
Okay, Roberto from WHO, can you please give us your thoughts?
Okay, let me upload my presentation.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to present some perception about tobacco excise taxation in Pakistan related to the questions that were made for this webinar. In relation to formulation, we have been working with the FIR for many years, basically discussing the modification of the structure and rate levels. Initially, our work was concentrated on revenue simulations with different rates and different structures, basically to discuss the revenue implications of tax increase. But recently, and because of the political economy problems that Mr. Tariq raised, our perception work has been concentrating on discussing industry argument and showing industry behavior. For example, for this budget, we prepare a report using the available research made by the partners that Frank mentioned, but also we show how the two big companies from low before the tax increase, in order to show a strong decrease in the initial months of the year, and to drop revenues, and to, in some sense, to undermine the FBR tax policy. So for us, it's essential to discuss the problems, doubts, questions that authorities have in relation to impacts. And that is the type of work that we do. The revenue figures is just one of the answers, but we work all the political economy problems. And of course, we use the health evidence to support our claim of higher rates. I think that in terms of effectiveness, I agree with the Frank presentation. So really, tobacco tax rates function. So there is no doubt that they reduce consumption and increase revenues. But we are, of course, more concerned about one of the industry arguments, and one of the questions that Mr. Tariq present, in relation to the movement of the smoker from legal to illegal cigarettes. So there is no reduction of smoking prevalence, and there is not effect on revenues. That precisely was the argument of the two big companies in relation to the last financial year. And I think that we have to be aware that in Pakistan, we have problems to show effectiveness because we don't have enough data on prevalence and consumption. We don't have data on other tobacco products, recent data, to show how the substitutions go from legal cigarettes to other tobacco products. So we need more frequent surveys about the illicit trade market, and we need more, in fact, we need to publish the Fed revenue data, because it's one instrument to do the policy discussion. And this is not a crazy idea. Many countries are publishing their monthly revenue figures. Well, we have the Brazil case, just an example, in the countries of the same level of development of Pakistan. But certainly in developed countries, you have the revenues figures, and this is important to show the problems and the performance of the tax policy. And here I have a message for the health authorities. I think that the health authorities can help the tax authorities providing information on prevalence of legal and illegal consumption, provide information on other tobacco products, and researchers and civil society organizations should help health authorities on this effort. Because the industry has the argument, and I heard this argument, that all the efforts of the tobacco tax policy in Pakistan show no results in prevalence or in consumption. So that is something that we have to revert, because when you have higher rates, you have you could have more illicit market as a proportion, but you have a reduction of total consumption because cigarettes become more expensive. Legal cigarettes and illegal cigarettes, and that is another feature of the legal market. Normally, the industry insists that the tax policy don't affect the illegal market. No, it's not true. When legal cigarettes increase, illegal prices also increase. Finally, I think that the main challenges that we perceive, and this is not an official WHO position, but it's the position of those people of WHO working in the country, that there is a strong tobacco industry interference in tax and government policy decisions, because basically the industry argument is credible. The people trust the rationale of the industry, and I think that there are many elements that we have been gathering about the failures of the industry argument. Yeah, and I mainly the research of PIDE, SPDC, and our small analysis as well shows the failures of the industry argument. I think that all agree that we have a problem of insufficient monitoring and enforcement procedures in place. It is necessary to improve cigarette tax administration. And the problem of last year create a situation for FBR. The industry put the argument that the FBR cannot venture because they are not able to get the revenues. So FBR now has, it's our perception, FBR has the need to improve tax administration in order to secure the revenue. So the bottom line, the industry argument is strong because its general reputation inside the Pakistan society and the government, and the difficulties to secure revenues. And finally, there are other challenges with different degrees of political leverage. Tobacco farmers and tobacco processing units opposing to higher Fed rate on processed tobacco leaves, the opposition of the smaller companies. By the way, the smaller companies increase revenues and increase the reporting. So the problem of reporting in Pakistan is concentrating on the two big companies, because in the last financial year, the smaller companies increase the reporting of the quantities and the reporting of revenue. So there is this paradoxical situation where the industry, the big companies say there is a disaster because everything goes to the illicit market, and you show the small companies increasing the reported sales and the reported revenues to FBR. And finally, there is a strong allegation about the situation of AJK, and there is a recent research of SPDC about this. So these are other issues that revolving around the tax policy decision. Finally, I would like to leave a message that we prepared this year our team to cooperate with FBR on tax administration problems. And we, our practice is to listen the problems, to try to figure out the problems. And we identified that the tax administration is a big issue, and we want to cooperate with FBR in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for offering your assistance to the FBR for improving our taxation and a number of issues. I'm grateful. I'm grateful, and we will be utilizing your support, obviously, for improving our tobacco taxation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. Now, should we get to the studies? Would SPDC like to go first? SPDC, Saber Saab. I don't know where he is. So, Saber Saab, would you like to go first?
Khalid is here, sir. Khalid can start.
Okay, Khalid Saab, go ahead.
Okay.
Khalid Saab.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I'm sorry, because of a system glitch, I had to shift my place. So, but it's very nice to be here on this panel, and especially learning again new things from Professor Frank, Roberto. And it's also very amazing to see member IRS, that how willing he is in terms of listening and willing to cooperate in terms of improving the tax policy design, because this is what the academicians are here to help him. So I'll not be very long, because most of the things have been taken up by Professor Frank in a larger context. And most of the things which he have discussed are also true in the case of Pakistan. And then Professor Roberto, how he has discussed what the issues FBR is facing with and the possible ways out. But I'll briefly share with you my experiences, which we took when we were doing this report on economics of tobacco for Pakistan, which resulted into publication of the report. And most of the things were also presented in the form of policy brief, but I'll just go over it to apprise the panelists and the participants that what were the experiences which we learned. Okay. So when we talk about the taxation structure in general, the tax policy planning is very centralized. As Tariq Saab have also mentioned, that there is some sort of data utilization, but the overall context of tax policy making is fairly complex, and it does not have the bottom-up approach kind of a thing. There are administrative measures besides the policy measures which are taken, but the overall focus is revenue. And that's true to a sense, because it's, of course, the revenue organ of the state which should focus on collecting more and more revenue. But once it is doing so, there are many other fruits of taxation policy which are often not taken into picture, or at least not considered in terms of the weighing out of them. There are tax policies which are based on sectoral approach. And when we talk about the sector, there is always a reference that, for example, the tobacco tax sector is the most buoyant sector in terms of providing us a revenue source. So this means it's a collection of all the resources coming from various possible taxes, federal excise, sales tax, the VAT, or the other. So that kind of approach again takes into a mixed kind of a baggage of policies where the revenue is on the top and the individual taxation principles are basically not considered. So for example, when we talk about the FED, the objective at the FBR would not be thinking whether to reduce the consumption by using this FED arm of instrument of taxation, or is it a revenue spinner? And that's what basically is also important, that because the FED is the top contributor in the federal excise duty for Pakistan, it basically helps to contribute, especially those sectors which are basically under the FED. Almost especially the tobacco sector, that's among the 10 top contributors in terms of the resources. So most of the policies are focused in terms of the revenue and not the other possibilities which could be considered. When we talk specifically about the tobacco taxation in Pakistan, it has improved a lot, moving away from a complex system in which there were ad valorem taxes, there were specific taxes. They have moved to a simpler regime in which there are specific taxes, at least for the locally produced cigarettes. There are ad valorem taxes, but these are for the imported taxes and products which are like the cigarette, or they are basically put in place in terms of the tobacco, but not purely the cigarettes. And this is the most, not even if not the most, but among the one which is most legislated tax structures. Besides this, there is the oil price sector, in which there are changes made on the basis of SROs. But we see also in the tobacco sector, there are lots of SROs. They are they're trying to improve the structure, then they're holding back based on certain issues coming out as lobbying or other practical issues. The last SRO came in on the 11th June, almost like 19 days before the budget. Although this creates a kind of an uncertainty if we think about the business perspective, that there are legislations which are made just 19 days before the budget. Why can't it come under the regular finance bill? But to say so, this is most actively legislated tax structure. So it's a very dynamic kind of a thing. But unfortunately, over time, the focus has not been on the value chain, as Professor Roberto has also mentioned, that there are possible ways of taxing this particular sector, starting right from the green leaf threshings where the tobacco is being processed. And there was legislation also which was made, but that was called back. But still, there are certain elements to it which are which can be implemented, such as the informants and the information required. So besides the overall policy planning, when we went into the field where we saw the administration happening, there was again a sectoral based approach, and that basically exacerbated the problems coming from the top. The same person had to consider the targets. The same person had to mobilize in terms of monitoring, even pursue the tax paying firms to get the audit and other things. So there is not bifurcation in terms of the field formations as well. And on top of that, these persons at the field are also not very much capacitated in terms of human resources and other infrastructure. So basically, it turns out again a kind of a revenue-based approach in which the targets are given and the field staff is just motivated to collect that. And whatever is happening other than that, such as the enforcement, the compliance and other things, that is on the lower end of the value. Then there is lower probability of the deduction as well in terms of the mechanisms which are in place. For example, the ban role which was placed in order to see which bundle is moving from which place to the other, that was a bad way in the sense that it did not realize the actual detection. Now they have improved to a sense, but still the track and trace system, which ideally should have been there, is not in place. When we went into the field, there was other facts also which came to our light. For example, if a particular consignment is seized because it was not tax paid, the only penalty to the firm which was basically sending that was that its cigarettes are going to be confiscated. It was not penalized in a sense, although this time it has a bit improved in the sense that now the conveyance, the truck in which the confiscated goods are going to be carried out would also be basically apprehended, but still that's not a kind of a penalty. So basically the FBR approach is not to punish for rectification, rather it's basically just for the recovery of tax. Again, the revenue principle holds, not the improvement in the enforcement and other matters. As we have discussed, Tariq Sahab also mentioned, the track and trace system is still on track, not on track. Now, there are stringent regulations. We cannot say that in terms of making it black and white, the policies are weak. There are many registration requirements, data requirements, and invoicing requirements, but still the FED is suboptimal at its best because of the very nature. For example, the tax which is charged is a specific tax. So that provides a kind of a price floor and let the businesses set their own price in terms of what price they want to charge. So there is a kind of a notches of price, and we don't see price competitions happening at the lower end of the consumption. then it's very surprising to see that since there are very small number of the cigarette manufacturers, for example, two biggest companies may hold almost 70–80% of the shares of the market. So why can't we opt for those tax regimes in which there are supervised sales or there are installed production capacity regimes? Because these are just two bigger firms which can basically be taken up in terms of having a better enforcement. And finally, in terms of having a policy for future, which is evidence-based, there is plenty of data available in the form of monthly returns and other issues. And if they are used properly, as Tariq Sahab have also mentioned, we can come out with certain policy proposals which are protecting the revenues as well as protecting the other benefits which are associated with the tax policy. For example, our report suggested that if we shift to a two-tier system, that's not just going to improve the revenue stream, but also improve our public health concerns. So if we use the data, if we use the evidence which is lying with the FBR, we can still bring out better policy changes. And we are happy to inform the audience here is that PIDE is in negotiation with FBR, its department, SPR and S, which is basically the data custodian and others, that soon we would be able to collaborate with them in terms of informing them in terms of better policy making and improving our understanding as well. So overall, the enforcement or revenue improvement through the efficiency of collection is much neglected area of the reforms in the FPR. And it's not just PIDE statement, that is something which is also quoted in newspapers and others. Thank you very much. I'll stop here. And if there are questions afterwards, I'll come back to that.
Thank you, Khalid Saab. Let's go to SPDC. Saber Saab, go ahead. Hello, Saber Saab, are you there? Is Saber Saab there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was muted and I was not able to share my voice. So anyway, I need to share my screen. So just give you the. Thank you very much for the PIDE inviting for this very fruitful seminar. It's very fruitful discussion, and I'm glad to know the views of FBR member, Frank, and other participants, and it's very heartening. So let's move on to my presentation. Since there are 4 questions, and I'm not covering the whole 4 questions, I'm just focusing on the last 2 questions. And the important question for me is, should tobacco taxation be executed through FED and GST, or should there be health tax as well? So first of all, GST is not a tobacco tax. The GST is a consumption tax, and it's not only for the tobacco. It's for other goods as well. So whatever you consume, theoretically you have a consumption tax, and GST is a consumption tax. It's not a tobacco tax. FED is a tobacco tax, but if you really want to add a health tax on top of the FED, so you have to consider few questions before saying, should we go for it or should not we not go for it? And apart from multiplicity of taxes, these questions is health is a devolved subject. Who will collect the health tax? FBR or provincial administration? If FBR collects the health tax, then how it will be distributed? And because health is a devolved subject, so if you really want to earmark the health earnings, then what would be the mechanism? So you have to think through first before going for the health tax. And my third question is how it will earmark for the health spending. Remember, we have in the past ICRA surcharge, and the idea of the ICRA surcharge is to collect revenues for education and not for any other things. But we all know what is happening to that. Similarly, in 7th NFC ward, we also earmarked 1% for the war on terror, and we don't know whether it's really earmarked for war on terror or not. So if you really want to add health tax, that is important consideration. And before moving from the health tax, one important thing is you should know what is the distribution of present FED. At the moment, if 100 billion is collected from the FED on tobacco, it is distributed by different numbers, and that is these numbers came from the NFC award. So federal government is the biggest shareholder in a way. If you're not collecting, aggregating all the provincial value, federal government get 43% of the revenues. Bluistan get the 5% revenues. Punjab 29% of the revenue. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa 9% revenue, and Sindh has a 14% share in the total FED collected in on the tobacco taxes. So we have to consider if we are really want to go for health taxes, are those numbers different than these numbers, or we are also proposing we should go for the NFC. My second response to the last question, what are, if any, the main hurdles being faced by the FBR on tobacco taxation? I consider there are two big challenges faced by the FBR. One is underreporting by the firms. Second, administration differences between tariff and non-tariff areas. So let's go for the first, underreporting. We did a very good study and we used different econometric techniques. We went through the large number of data sets, including the financial time series and also the macroeconomic data sets. And what we found, a very strange, peculiar behavior. When you raise the tax, as Roberto also mentioned, the size of underreporting is not static. It's different. So if you look the supply function, which is based on the fiscal data, we found in 2016-17, which is an outlier, of more than 40% underreporting of the cigarettes by the large firms. And in 2017-18, which is somehow near to the track, we found more than 20% underreporting in the data from the large firms. And if you go for the financial time series data, and our estimate shows, which is a financial time series on the calendar year, and our estimate shows 40% underreporting in 2016 and 22% underreporting in the 2017. The research, of course, is already available for on our website. There are also policy brief, so that's why I'm not going into the details of how we did it. Second thing is like
basically they looked at balance sheets of firms and came to the conclusion that there's 40% in the reporting from the balance sheet. Is that right?
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me? Is that right?
Now I can hear you.
So what you are basically saying is that you looked at the balance sheets of the companies, Pakistan Tobacco, Laxon, etc., and you came to the conclusion that there's 40 and 27% underreporting. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
So the balance sheets are available and FPR is not reconciling the balance sheets at all?
I mean, it's not only the balance sheet, basically. We also try to use the time series data. So let's say if you have historical trend, you know the different cost component, and then you know the production and cost. So by comparing those production and cost, then we are able to figure it out these numbers. And one of the surprising things when we analyzing the balance sheet, despite they are showing the lower production, their profit margin is on the higher side. So anyway, the second thing I also want to cover is the AJK. I was in the first time I heard this issue in the PIDE conference when a representative of FBR says AJK is a big problem, as even in the heart of Islamabad you will find the illegal cigarette, unduty paid cigarette, and they are not illegal, they are legal. And that's why to clarify this thing, we conducted a study on the AJK and we published a brief. What we found is that there is no difference in the legal front. So AJK and the Pakistan has the same legal laws for the tax collection, the rate structure, everything is same. The problem is administration structure is different. In AJK, they are responsible for collecting the federal excise duty. In Pakistan, FBR is responsible for collecting the federal excise duty. And that is one of the biggest difference. We also computed, published the numbers, how much they're collecting or how much Pakistan is, FBR is collecting the numbers. After looking these numbers, we find some differences in administration, and our the way we feel it, if the biggest challenge is tax evasion is due to administration and governance issue, and not from the legal side. So AJK in that way is not a hurdle, but if you look the differences in the administration, it's a hurdle. And what we are proposing, if you are only want to put all the measures which Tariq Saab already mentioned in their speech, only in FBR in Pakistan and not in AJK, then it might be difficult to get the results. Because if there's a one is a strong administration, one side have a strong administration and the other side has a weak administration, then you will not able to reconcile the result. You will not able to get the results what you are looking for. So second, we are proposing a strong coordination among federal, provincial, and local government is needed. And with the passage of time, local government seems to be a bigger player, because they are responsible for their union council, their district council. They are the one who can really monitor at the end of the stream consumption, where we need to focus more, rather than because if you are collecting taxes only on the production and there is no in between anything, then it's difficult to monitor them, despite having the track and trace system. And finally, we suggest FBR should also monitor tax evasion by analyzing financial data of companies. Such analysis will help build a robust tax collection mechanism for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabir Saab. I'll go to the floor immediately, folks. Whoever wants to raise hands, please do raise hands for questions. But before I go there, I'd like to come back to all of you, and I'm still a little confused. This tax, the GST, is obviously being charged at the consumer level. The FED is also being charged at the consumer level, or is it being charged at the factory? I mean, somehow I'm a little confused. Shouldn't the FED be also on the packet of cigarette that I buy? And if that is the case, then what difference does it make as to the factory profit? Every packet of, and where it comes from, every packet of cigarette should have the same FED charge on it. Am I wrong? QG Tariq Saab, what would you say?
I think Tariq Saab has left.
Tariq Saab had to leave. He was called for a meeting.
Okay, no problem. Can we go to...
Can I respond?
Yes.
Can I respond to it? Basically, FED has the two structures. So there is a premium brand and the other is economy brand. So every pack of cigarette not have the same structure. It's a different. If you are buying the gold leaf or any premium brand, you have to pay a higher FED. And if you buy a economy pack, maybe Marlboro or anything, I don't aware of it. But anyway, so then you pay the less tax. The issue is that FED is a production tax. It's collected from the firms. While GST is a consumer tax, it should be collected in the VAT mode. But unfortunately, so far, VAT is not collected. Sales tax is not collected in a VAT mode after getting out of the factory. So we are still collecting the retail sales tax model, which implies if we collect a whole stream at the factory level. And that's why we are not able to monitor it after getting out of the factory. Once it's skipped the tax, it's skipped.
FED is on the same principles of the sales tax. So basically there is no difference in the two, except for the rates. Basically the FED has a separate rate and a separate category, and the GST is separately. Otherwise the application mechanism is the same.
Khalid, there's a minute difference in it. Basically, FED is not adjustable. While in sales tax, you can adjust the tax you paid on the inputs.
Input adjustment is there. Agreed.
I agree. No, look, the FED, as you said, is a sin tax. FED is always charged on a product that the state wants to discourage. Otherwise, there's no reason for an FED, right? FED is a sin tax. So you charge it on cigarettes, alcohol, etc. We don't have alcohol, so it doesn't matter. We are a pure country. But on cigarettes, Yeah, we have an FED. Now, the way I look at it is FED has to be charged on every cigarette as a lump sum. Forget the input adjustment. Nobody wants input adjustment because it's a sin tax. So FED is charged on every packet, I would assume. And in fact, every packet, I've seen it in other countries. I don't know. I haven't bought anything in Pakistan, no cigarettes. But in fact, I gave up cigarettes 50 years ago or 40 years ago. That's a long time ago. There used to be a whole information thing there. How much is the sale tax? How much is the excise tax, etc. And that every consumer knew what you were paying. Do we have that or not? And if we don't, why don't we have that? Why is this charge on every cigarette?
We have the sales tax written on the cigarettes, but not the.
So you're saying FED is charged on a production mode, right?
Yes.
So that's the problem. So there are two problems, and then there is this problem, AJK, etc. What you're saying is there's a formal cigarette market, which is British American Tobacco, and the other, and
Philip Morris,
right? And then there are a bunch of these small producers, right? And the small producers, do they have their own brands, or are they copying the brand of Philip Morris and British American Tobacco?
No, they have their own brands. Actually, they name them as well, especially those which are so-called duty paid brands.
So how many total producers are there of cigarettes?
Well,
I know of the two big. I know of the two big ones: British American, which is the largest company in the stock market, surprisingly, or the second largest. It's even larger than OGDC, or sometimes it depends on the price. But
basically, three companies listed in Karachi Stock Exchange.
Okay.
One is Philip Morris and Pakistan Tobacco. Finally, the third one is Faber Tobacco. We also surveyed the Azad and Jammu Kashmir, and we found that two companies, Wilson and I forget the name of other countries. So companies, so they too are operating in there, but they have a different brands. You will find World Cup, Kisan, so many brands, and we try to trace out whether these two companies which are operating in AJK are producing the cigarette, or there are so many small producers who are producing. So it is very difficult to unpin how many producers, because neither labor force survey nor enterprise survey cover any information about the other producers.
So there are about, I think, 21 cigarette manufacturers in Pakistan.
Do you have any idea of the market share? I mean, let's say British American Tobacco, it's such a large company, it should have the largest share in the system. Philip Morris would be the second, Faber would be the third. Do we have any idea of market shares of these companies? How much of the market do they own?
Pakistan Tobacco Company has a more than 60% share, and Philip Morris is on the declining trend. So they have around 30%, 25, 30, and the Faber is 5% roughly.
All producers only 5%.
Yeah.
All produce around 5 to 10%, not more than that.
Yes, 90% is the basic three big companies.
So doesn't that make the task of taxation much easier? Exactly. If you have 90% of these big companies that are easily identifiable, that are sitting there right in front of you like a sitting duck, then I don't understand all this thing about administration and, running around, putting in electronics, etc. It sounds to be like, hey, if I see these two giants sitting there, how difficult is it to go and find out what they're doing? And as you said, you can find out from the balance sheet too. I'm a little surprised. I mean, this is to me, it seems a very simple exercise. So what's happening? What am I missing?
You're right, but what the argument which they present is that if you tax us, then the production line coming from these smaller companies are going to go up. So basically, you're going to lose resources. So rather than pulling strings in terms of better enforcement, they always ask for lower taxes, because the illicit trade is their key argument in terms of not implementing the supervised sales or having like the overall productive capacity-based sales tax or FED taxes.
So do you have any idea of the elasticity of substitution? I mean, I know people are very, very sensitive to the brand that they smoke, right? And people would not easily switch to the Kisan brand from, Dunhill or something, right? So if there is a very low elasticity of substitution, this argument that somehow people will switch to the small brands if you put an FED on the larger ones seems again a little strange to me. Have you guys any idea?
Let me clarify. Let me clarify. Basically, you have to divide this entire tobacco manufacturing in two ways. One is the premium brand, and you are rightly pointed out that there is a less switching in the premium brand. But if you look for the lower end, where the poor people are consuming, they are not very rigid or stick to the particular brand. So these Kisan, Olympic, all these cigarettes is for the lower poor classes or not very rich people. And that's why they are manipulating it. That's why the cigarette industry is arguing that if you raise the taxes on the lower tier, we will switch. They will switch to the illegal cigarettes. But that argument is also the false argument, because as we said, we proved it in our study when FBR raises the taxes and there is a low. They show the low production. They underreport basically. That is not the switching from to the other brands, because their market share is very low, and that's why we said that the underreporting is the real problem.
I think two things that you guys should put in focus. One is the market structure.
Can I add something here?
Go ahead, Naya.
The question you asked would be answered in one of the studies we are doing right now. We are looking at the switching behavior. And it is a switching behavior between cigarette brands and even switching from one kind of tobacco product to another kind of tobacco product. I mean, maybe somebody would, because of the price increase, stop smoking cigarette and switch to Nasfar. So we are looking band switching, product switching, and that study would hopefully be out by December. I mean, and there is willingness to pay aspect in that, brand switching, product switching. We are including everything in that study.
No, but let me ask you, why would you even be concerned? Look, if I'm an addict, you try and switch me out of tobacco, I might go to opium, I might go to marijuana or something. Okay, fine. So big deal. I mean, hey, addicts are very small in number, and addicts will switch to anything because they have a habit. And you can't, in terms of this macro picture of taxation and trying to change behavior, you are dealing with the large mass of the population, not the small addict population, right? You are trying to influence the people. Am I right, Dr. Frank? That we are trying to attack the habits of a certain group that is rational, that will respond to the price structure, and that will try and, people like me who are sensitive to price, and I'll say, hey, I'm going to spend $200 of my budget doing this, so I might as well, try and watch TV or something, right? But if I'm an addict and I'm going to switch to marijuana or something, then fine. I mean, what can you do about it? But I assume that's a very small percentage of the population. Am I right, Dr. Frank?
It's a very small percentage of the population, and it's actually something that we see the opposite. A lot of times these addictive behaviors are complementary to one another, so that rather than seeing price go up on one, people switching to something else, what you tend to see is a reduction in overall consumption across the different substances. So we've done some work in the US that hasn't been done in Pakistan yet, but we find that marijuana and cigarettes, for example, are complements. We find that alcohol and cigarettes are complements. So you actually, by raising the tax on one, you see benefits in terms of reductions in the consumption of the other ones, in addition to the benefits you get from the reductions in cigarette consumption. I think the new work that's happening with PIDE will help shed some light on this. It doesn't look at the substitution outside of tobacco, but I think it will be very helpful in understanding this switching between brands, switching between tobacco products in response to changes in relative taxes.
So the complementary argument is very, very, very important. It should be taken into account, the substitution complementarity argument. But I think, quite frankly, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the big companies, this is the political economy issue. The big companies are trying to get a tax reprieve and increase their demand by pointing fingers at the small companies who are marginal players, who are very small players, that there will be a large substitution. The small companies don't even have the capacity to make that substitution. It'll be a very small substitution, if at all. I mean, I've been on the policy table and I've been in meetings where the big companies came and said this, and we've had this discussion. The problem is that the way I look at it is this is a very small segment of the market. It's an informal segment of the market. They're not even geared up to supply the huge amounts that Pakistan Tobacco and Philip Morris supply. So I hate to keep naming those companies, but they're very large. They're 90% of the business. So their balance sheets will be hurt by taxation. The poor companies may respond by means of increasing, maybe getting 1 or 2% more market share, but that's about it. I don't see them getting 50% of the market share. So the question really is the government has to be clear on this. And I think our studies can make that clearer. But nevertheless, let's go to the floor. Let's get Ali Kamal. Ali.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. How are you? Assalamu alaikum to all. Hello to all. Basically, it's a revenue-based approach of the policymakers, and basically, it's the same tax to fund healthcare program, research on health, blah blah blah. I would like to highlight a new book, which is a new book. It's a book by Raghuram Rajan, which is a missing link over in the policies, which says that government, markets, and community-based approach. So community is totally missing in all the policy making, and even if the tax policy or the devolved policy we are talking about, whether it's a FED tax or a GST tax, the community should be involved in that, and it should be local tax if it can be, because if the FED can be local test, it's Mahmood Khalid or Sabir or whoever wants to tell us that it can we collect FED, change the name of FED, but can be at a local test or not. So secondly, is it enough? Are we enough putting tax on the cigarettes to reduce its consumption? Because if we look at USA, UK, or France, they put higher taxes on the cigarettes to reduce their consumption. Are they substituting from cigarettes to marijuana or some other drugs? Are they so much addict? And the last question maybe it's basically answered by Dr. Doreen Ayab, that it's a behavioral aspect. What's the elasticity of substitution? And I think Umar is still here, and he can tell us that whether if we put 100% or 200 or 300% of tax on cigarettes, whether the smokers will change from smoking the cigarettes to smoking something else or not. Thank you.
Fair enough. Muhammad Khurram, then I'll come back to the panelists. Please note the questions. Muhammad Khurram.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Do you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. It's a very nice webinar. I just wanted to raise this issue that you are talking about taxes, and there's a very there's a kind of a brand which is easily being used and followed only for the people of in the parliament and the presidency. I don't know what's the name of that particular brand, but I think it's almost tax free. So the rich people of Pakistan, they're not prone to the tax. I mean, they can enjoy the cigarettes. So, and the other thing I want to point out is that the price alone is cannot be alone the mechanism to stop stop from smoking the cigarettes, because I've known smokers that they cannot switch to lower brands of cigarettes only because of price, because if someone switches to another brand, he or she could get allergy or sore throat and more health problems. So they stick to the same brand even if the costs are rising. So in order to avoid all these medical complications. So, and I will definitely the first question, which is related to, could be related to the FVRs, gentlemen.
Apparently, the brand that you're talking about, somebody said in the chat room that it is.
Sir, I think it's a very special kind of brand. Only it's being like given to the employees and bureaucrats who are working for the presidency and like
It's
high scale offices.
called the Senate.
Special brand.
Company.
Yes, Senate,
Okay,
Senate and
fair enough,
politicians.
fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, tobacco
Thanks.
company is distributing it because one of the companies has some senators as well, some people in the parliament. So that's fair enough. But
Yes.
Nayab, do you want to say anything on the subject?
No, not really. Zauddin Saab is here. He's
Yes.
one of our PI partners. I guess he would like to say something.
Okay, go ahead, Zauddin Saab.
Thank you very much for giving me opportunity. Yes, first thing I would like to quote this. This was the one of the senator who's the owner of the tobacco industry, and he distributed this Senate package free of cost without pictorial warning in the Senate to his colleagues. It was a very wonderful webinar and a discussion on the tobacco taxation, and it's really needed. I don't know the honorable member FBR is still available with us or not.
No,
I had a question. I already posted in the here that it's tobacco industry argument that if government is going to raise the taxes, their prices is going to increase. It's not only increase the illicit trade, but it will increase the local non-duty paid and the counterfeit products. I used to argue this with the tobacco industry when they were visiting the ministry, that I never saw any litigation, any complaint from the major tobacco industry partners against those culprit using their brand name, using their products. I don't know. It's definitely there is something fishy. The tobacco industry is not actually want to make it public or claim this. Yes, this is the Senate. Yeah, thank you.
This is the cigarette that Khurram was talking about.
No, but I think, quite frankly, let me ask a question here. Should this, and maybe Professor Frank can answer this question. Professor Frank, if this was done in the US, would the federal excise duty be collected? I mean, is this possible to do it without collecting the excise duty? Professor Frank,
in the US, yes, I'm sorry. In the US, the federal excise duty is collected at the manufacturer level, and it applies to all cigarettes unless they're intended for export. So this type of system wouldn't be possible where you'd be able to have these sort of cigarettes distributed without paying the federal excise duty. So there are a lot of issues at the state level in the US with the taxes that get applied there, but not with the federal tax.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I must confess that there are still a number of questions that come to mind. For example, Khalid Mahmood, do we have an idea of the elasticity of demand for cigarettes? Is it a very high elasticity, a very low elasticity? Dr. Frank, do you have that in the world? Do we have any idea of the elasticity of demand?
So actually, our report basically had this section on the elasticity. Dr. Muhammad Nasir, who's also present in this, can shed light on it. But as I said earlier, that our results were at par with the journal overall results of the world. The premium brand or the rich class had a lower elasticity of taxes, so they can basically afford any type of increase in the taxes. So that's what we suggested as well, that the revenue objective of the firms as well as the FPR can be basically managed there. Whereas the lower premium brands, lower brand cigarettes had high and negative significant income price elasticity. So therefore, there was a probability that if we increase the taxes there, they're going to switch towards other possibility or even reduce consumption. That's the second part of the study which we're doing. But we had significant elasticities, lower for the higher brand and those who can afford it. So in terms of the higher income quintiles, and for the lower bracket, the price elasticity was high and significant.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, folks, who would like to answer some of the, Dr. Frank, would you like to answer some of the questions that were raised?
So just a couple of questions or comments. One was the question that you raised earlier about the issues around substitution, substitution not just within tobacco products or across brands of cigarettes, but also substitution to other substances. And again, there's no evidence that that happens. If anything, again, these tend to be complementary behaviors, and raising price on tobacco products, raising price on cigarettes can lead to additional benefits in terms of reductions in some of the other substance use as well. And then this other comments around price not being the only factor that affects demand, I completely agree with that. What we see is that it really requires a comprehensive effort if one is going to reduce tobacco use. So price is by itself the single most important factor. But other policies, other tobacco control efforts are going to be important as well. And that's part of what's behind things like the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that talks about not just price, but other demand reduction strategies, other measures to control supply. And that's part of what we see in WHO's Empower package that talks about the importance of graphic health warning labels, other public education efforts, smoke-free policies, restrictions on tobacco marketing, and support for people that are trying to quit. So I think those, price will work very well by itself. Price will work even better when you have a more comprehensive effort to try to deal with tobacco use, both demand and supply. Thank you.
You reminded me of that. I was going to ask that, but then I thought it was not part of the study. That why are we not working on other aspects of demand? Since our objective is to reduce demand and not necessarily just to raise revenue, why are we not working on other aspects of demand manipulation? For example, as you said, smoke-free zones and other things, right? Why are we not thinking about those things? Smoke-free zones, many other things that, for example, one of the things that discouraged many people when I was in the fund was that people had to go outside the building to smoke. So the stigma associated with standing out in the street with a coat on in the winter and trying to smoke and everybody noticing you, lots of people got dissuaded by that. So
I agree that is something that is happening. I mean, I think there are civil society organizations. I think the tobacco control community in Pakistan is trying to move towards more comprehensive policies to try to reduce tobacco use. I think it ends up being the same challenges that we talked about in terms of the opposition from the tobacco companies and the lack of political will to get this done. But I think there are several others on the call that can speak to exactly what's happening in terms of the tobacco control efforts that are in Pakistan. But rest assured that people are trying to implement strong policies in addition to raising the tax.
Okay, folks, Khalid Saab, any questions?
Sir, I would also like to take comment from Professor Frank regarding the use of higher prices through taxes to discourage the new smokers. Basically, it's a kind of an addiction or perpetual demand which we are trying to break. So even if it doesn't help the current existing smokers in too much changing their behavior, the possibility of having a lower epidemic of tobacco smoking can basically be reduced for future. So if that can also be elaborated.
Yes, that is definitely true. So we know that tobacco tax increases, price increases will affect current smokers' behavior. Many will try to quit. Very addictive, as we've been talking about. So it sometimes takes many tries before somebody can quit successfully. But where the tax has its biggest impact is in reducing initiation among young people who haven't taken up the habit yet, who haven't become addicted. And we see in the work that we've done in the US and what we've seen around the world, kids are somewhere between 2 and 3 times more responsive to increases in taxes, increases in prices. And it's particularly effective when it comes to preventing them from becoming addictive, preventing them from becoming regular tobacco users. So it's not just going to have these short run effects, it's also going to have a growing impact over the long run as a result of deterring people from taking up tobacco use. Good point.
Dr. Roberto Iglesias, can you tell us what the WHO recommends in terms of a health policy, but specifically regarding economics? What should we do to reduce cigarette demand? So what kind of price as well as non-price measures should we be thinking of? Dr. Iglesias?
Thank you for the question. In fact, I think that Frank was answering this. We work under a framework, convention for tobacco control, the FCTC, and the mandate is not only on tax and prices, is around several measures, non-price measures to reduce consumption. You mentioned one of several of them. So, and Frank also pointed some of them. So in Pakistan, we are also working with the Ministry of Health in order to implement the Framework Convention. For example, warning labels, pictorial pictures, pictorial health warnings in cigarettes are important to discourage the consumption and certainly a smoke-free environment. So we are supporting the efforts of the Ministry of Health. And if you allow me, I think that the best way of the Ministry of Health to support tax policy is to implement the other policies, because normally one argument of the tax authorities is why I have to do all the effort if you are not implementing the other things. So, and we have that discussion with FER. And for this reason, I mentioned some of the questions. For example, good data on prevalence and consumption, good data on other tobacco products, because FER is concerned about the substitution process, not only to the illegal cigarettes, but to other tobacco products. So all these things to watch and monitor the consumption of other tobacco products is an important tool in the tax policy discussion. So I would say the WHO is trying to build capacity on the implementation of the FCTC provisions on demand reduction. And as Frank said, it's very difficult in Pakistan because one of the problems is that the big tobacco companies has credibility in not only among tax authorities that listen the arguments, but also at different levels of the government. So, for example, the industry undermine the other tobacco control policies, and authorities are listening. And I think that the work of the Ministry of Health is to refute and argue against this industry statement about the lack of effectiveness of the tax and other tobacco control policies.
So let me ask you, so what you would recommend, WHO would recommend is, one, we should put labels on cigarettes, right, which is health hazard labels, which would be educational for the people. The second thing is to actually have a smoking policy for offices and various public places, so that cigarettes can be, special areas where you can smoke and not everywhere. And what other restrictions should there be? Public places, you have restrictions, you have...
Yes, we have the the guidelines for smoke-free environments is comprehensive. It's not only a public office, so it's restaurants and public places. There are best practices, and we are helping the Pakistani government to implement the best practices elsewhere. And in relation to evidence, I think the smoke-free environments and taxation are the two big measures to reduce demand. So as Frank said, we have to put taxation with other tobacco control policies, and smoke-free environments are really effective to reduce consumption. So as you said, the people going outside to smoke is discourage the consumption and force the quitting decision. Yeah.
So I hope Mahmood Saab, Sipra Saab, you will put this in your report, the WHO guidelines. So Mahmood, Khalid, your last comments, and then we'll go to Sabir Saab. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Roberto, Sabir Saab, and Tariq Saab. It was a very good discussion. And since Dr. Nayab has also informed that in the next phase, we are looking after in terms of the cross product elasticity. So hopefully in future, we'll be able to put certain better policy proposals to the FPR as well in terms of having more evidence-based policy making. But for the time being, this is something which is more of a kind of misinformed kind of policy making, and our objective was basically to facilitate the FPR and those at the public health places that this is a win-win kind of a situation which we can work together with.
Fahim Jahangir, I don't like last-minute comments, but go ahead. Fahim Jahangir, quickly. Okay, Fahim is missing. Okay, Sabir Saab, would you like to say something?
Thank you very much. I agree. This is a very fruitful seminar, and we're also working for the few future studies, including this one of the survey where we are analyzing the mechanism, how it is responded by the participant, raising the revenues without going to the different kind of subdivision estimation. I also want to respond to the Ali Kamal's comment on the community involvement. I would say I do not suggest that FED should be collected by the local government. What I should suggest is that community should be involved in the effective implementation of the laws. So they are responsible to check whether illegal cigarettes is available in their community or not. And there is also a mechanism where district government can, district commissioner can be involved, or district monitoring committee can be involved to monitor whether the tax laws and graphical warnings and other things are taking place in their community or not. So that is one way we are looking for forward, and hopefully we will further analyze this kind of analysis. And thank you very much for your kind moderation. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Frank, would you like to say any last words?
I just agree. This has been a very useful discussion, and I think very helpful. And I'm just happy to see all the good work that's being done in Pakistan by our colleagues at PIDE, by our colleagues at SPDC, but by many others as well. And we're happy to continue to support this work and look forward to future discussions and to seeing progress with tobacco tax policy there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Dr. Roberto, any last thoughts from you?
I would like to thank all of you for this wonderful seminar, and I would like to stress that we are using the PIDE and SPDC research in our conversation, in our discussion with FER, and I think they are very good pieces of research and very useful, and I think that we have a wonderful cooperation, and I looking forward to work together in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. I think this has been a very good seminar. We should do more of these. We need to get into the entrails of policy, and this is exactly that. Tobacco is a very important subject. Of course, it's a health problem. Everybody recognizes that. As I said, in my lifetime, behavior has changed. As I mentioned, my professor would first chain smoke through the class. All kids were chain smoking, but now, fortunately, nobody dares to open a cigarette in a class, or we have learned even at parties now, people first ask, may I smoke? So that all this is because we have taken a proactive approach to tobacco. And I thank WHO, and I thank the University of Illinois Chicago for giving us this opportunity. We really need to take these steps further. And we are very happy for this cooperation. We will, inshallah, continue it. It's an important subject that we should push further. Thank you, folks. Thank you, everybody. My thanks to all the participants. And, inshallah, we'll continue doing this work and many other things. All the best. Khuda Hafiz. Bye-bye.